Okay, we're only 2 minutes after 3, and if everybody's having as much trouble with Microsoft as Teams as I'm having, there might be.
On your life.
Okay, we're good to go, Mr. Chair. I know there'll be a few more joining us as we go, so if you'd like to start, we can.
Okay, well, let's start. Oh, I see I've got chair's remarks up here. Yeah. My remarks are basically what I sent in the notice to all the members, that I've scarcely been in the South Nation drainage for this whole season, and with Alita being in British Columbia, our whole household has been quite disrupted, and I'm feeling very ineffective. So.
Well, hopefully Alita will have a safe return shortly. We can start on our agenda. I would just remind members, please, to use the raise your hand function. I don't have video feeds for everyone up on my screen, so I want to make sure we don't miss anyone. So if you can please use the raise your hand function, that would be most helpful. I'm going to start with a roll call just before we do agenda to let you know who is on from the committee. So we do have Elaine Karstead, Doug Thompson, our chair Fred Schuler, Kurt Meidel, Markham Clark, and Jean Landrio, and Stéphane Dubuc. And we are expecting 1 or 2 more shortly. So, Mr. Chair, we can start with the approval of today's agenda. We do not have a supplemental, so it was just a mover and seconder required for the main agenda. And again, if you can use your raise your hand functions, just in case I don't have your video feed up on my screen. Doug, thank you. And Kurt. Right, if there are no additions or corrections to the agenda, Mr. Chair, you can call the question.
Okay, is anyone opposed to approving the agenda?
See none, so that's carried. I don't believe there are any, but if there are any declarations of conflict of interest, now is the time to let us know. Seeing none, we can move into our staff, excuse me, project update. And our first up is Kat.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just, I don't see the update up there yet. Rhonda?
Is it not? You see slide, I'm seeing it on my end.
Yeah, I don't see it either, Rhonda, on mine.
Give me 1 second, let me try resharing here. That bumped me out. You can see it now.
Yes, perfect. So this first slide is just to give the committee an overview of drought conditions in the South Nation River watershed this past summer. So we have a water response team that's made up of representatives from different levels of government, as well as the agricultural community and other stakeholders across the jurisdiction. And we make decisions based on environmental data collected from the field. So this includes both precipitation as well as river flows. And there are 3 different levels based on what those indicate, based on the conditions in the watershed. We went into a level 1 low water advisory twice this past summer, the first from June 4th to August 4th, and that was due to a really dry spring that saw higher than normal temperatures. And then we had some rain throughout July that took us out of that low water condition. However, August, if everyone recalls, was quite hot. And again, we had very little sporadic rain. So that put us back into a level 1 low water advisory from September 9th to November 2nd. And just to give everyone sort of current conditions, we're normal for all precipitation and river flow indicators. Not sure if anyone had any questions about that. Okay, so I have a couple slides here on some different monitoring programs that we've completed this past fall. So SNC participates in the Provincial Groundwater Monitoring Network, and we have about 17 wells distributed across the jurisdiction where we look at water levels on an hourly basis, and we also look at water quality. So this picture is of Naomi at one of our wells. We're doing the water quality sample event that gets submitted to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, their lab, and gets analyzed for a suite of parameters. I have to say this data is really beneficial to several programs within SNC. The water level information, we've used it because we've got about a 20-year period of record now. We've used that data to calibrate our hydrologic model that we use in-house, and the groundwater levels are actually becoming a really good indicator for drought as well. We have a long enough period of record that we know now that if levels fall below the 25th percentile, that's a pretty good indicator of drought for us. Next slide. One of the other monitoring programs that we participate in is the Ontario Benthos Biomonitoring Network. And we were out this past fall sampling 35 stations. We collect the critters that live in the rivers, and then we analyze the samples looking at the different taxa that exist at each station. And these are a really good indicator of river health because they live in these rivers year round and are exposed to all the different stressors that could exist at those stations. So we in-house use a reference condition approach. Every station is compared to a group of sites that we know are in really good condition, and that's how we determine if our test sites are in fair or poor condition. Next slide. So we have been working really hard over the last few years expanding our monitoring networks, our climate monitoring networks, I should say, that help support our flood forecasting and warning and low water response programs. So this is our newest station. It was installed within the South Bearbrook catchment, just west of Carlsbad Springs within the city of Ottawa. This station will allow us to capture snow depth, soil moisture, all weather precipitation. So even when it's snow or sleet, we have an understanding of how much water is falling at that location. We also have we'll also be doing stream flow at this location because it's a bit of a gap within our monitoring network for determining stream flows. All of this information is transmitted in near real time over the GOES satellite network. And so we capture it in-house within our WISCI system, our water information system. And all of our decisions are made based on this, for the flood forecasting and warning and low water response programs are made based on these environmental conditions that we're collecting from the field. So it's really important to us that we're capturing accurate data that's timely and reliable. I don't know if anyone, okay. Oh, that's it.
Good afternoon to the committee. I'm just going to present for Ryan today. This is an update on some work that the stewardship staff were out doing over the past month. The field staff surveyed approximately 80 kilometers of the Ottawa River shoreline from Voyageur Provincial Park all the way to Rockland. And this was done by the SNC boat by taking some photos with a good quality camera of the perspective from the water to the shoreline along that entire stretch. And the photos were also geotagged. So now we pretty much have a big long picture where we can see what the erosion status is and if it's a natural shoreline or a developed shoreline all the way from Voyageur to Rockland, and this can be used by our staff without having to leave the office. Yes, Fred, see a question?
Yeah, did you look at crayfish along there? Because there's Archinectes lamosus, which is the invasive species that's come up from Lake Champlain through Montreal. And on the Quebec side, people have been finding it along that reach of the river, and it would be a first record for Ontario if we could get some.
Well, I can't say we looked for crayfish during this work. We were specifically focused on doing photos at about 30 kilometers an hour as we flew along the shoreline. So this work was specifically for engineering and erosion surveys.
Okay.
Oh, I'm back up here. Good afternoon again. So South Nation has been working on I guess a climate change impact project over the last couple years now. The first phase of the project was an impact assessment looking at how changes in extreme precipitation and changes in land use out to 2050 might impact stream flows. The next phase of this project is taking these modeled increases in stream flow and doing a vulnerability assessment by looking at how those increases in stream flow impact modeled floodplains and potentially the people and the infrastructure that live near these areas. So we're putting together some more of I guess a presentation based on this work. So looking forward to in the future coming and presenting to the Fish and Wildlife Committee on some of our findings. Oh, I see.
Yeah, I just, when you say your next phase, will you be extrapolating those flows like on the floodplains all the way down to the Ottawa River? Is that what the plan is? So
So we have when we completed the modeling work to look at what the likely increases in flows would be, we did that across the South Nation River watershed because we used our hydrologic model to help us with that work. For the next phase of this project, we'll be using areas where we have updated floodplain mapping. So a lot of systems within the city of Ottawa for this next piece.
okay, thanks.
No problem.
Good afternoon. This fall, we conducted invasive buckthorn removal on an SNC property near Limoges. It's located at the north end of Garlandside Road. We parked and carried in cutting and spraying equipment to treat a small stand of buckthorn. It was approximately 0.5 hectares in size. After cutting it down with brush saws, the stumps were treated with garland ready to use, which was sprayed directly on the stump. So you can see in the photo, that's the wand, and we're treating just the cut part of the tree. Next year, so in 2022, we'll return to the site and I'll be doing the assessment of the regrowth to see how successful that pesticide was for treating buckthorn. Fred, you have a question?
Yeah, what about the seed bank? It seems to me whenever I cut buckthorn, um, that there's incredible amounts of seed that germinate, and you get all these little seedlings.
So with this method, we weren't able to really treat the really small ones. I mean, you can see by the stem size, some of them are small, but um, even the larger ones, for whatever reason, they didn't have any berries on them. So I don't know if they were too shaded where they were to produce enough berries, but I checked all the larger ones that, I was looking, we were trying to target some that had berries on them because those are, according to the Ontario Invasive Plant Council's protocol, they want you to target the ones that are berry producing. And I couldn't find any in that stand. So they were all cut and treated. Hopefully we don't have a lot of, maybe there was berries in previous years. I don't know. I didn't see any stems. I didn't see any, leftovers from berries. But it is quite a dense forest where this stand of buckthorn is located. So, um, you know, I do know that some, fruiting trees don't produce berries under certain conditions. Maybe it was too dry part of the year. I'm not sure, but uh, I'll be looking for that next year, I guess, to see if any of the stands, if any of the cut stems show any regrowth or, that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's some buckthorn that I'm dealing with that had a very heavy crop of berries, and every time you cut one down, it just rained berries, and so there's probably going to be a lot of seedlings.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know if in previous years, like I said, I don't know if they had berries in the past, but these ones, for whatever odd reason, didn't have any berries. The Russell Scouts celebrated their 100th year anniversary, and South Nation was invited to provide activities for the parents and Scouts. Pat gave a really good presentation on the tree management of the J. Henry Treed Park, which is where they hosted their event. It's a very popular place for families within the community of Russell, and so there was a lot of people that were interested in how many of the trees were going to come down. It is an area that has a lot of ash trees, and there's quite a significant number of trees that are coming down. So there was, some people very interested to hear that in his presentation. And I did a presentation on aquatic bugs and how invertebrates are used to assess water quality. As Kat mentioned, part of our OBBN monitoring is using aquatic bugs. And so I was showing the kids how we do that and what we capture. So they're looking at the bucket to see what little critters are running around in there. Next slide.
If you recall from the last Fish and Wildlife Committee meeting, I brought an update on this project. SNC worked at the Healing Place property, or SNC 164, with some funding from Grasslands Ontario to establish a bird-friendly hay harvesting framework for this property, and also increase the quality of the hay forage crop coming off of this property to give an example of agriculture working with habitat for native species, and specifically here bobolink and eastern meadowlark. So we did such a good job with this project that Grasslands Ontario reached out to SNC to be a local delivery agent for grassland projects in our area. So now whenever landowners in our watershed want to do projects and apply for funding from Grasslands Ontario, SNC can give them help to submit an application and guide them through the process. And as of, I think only for over the past month or two, we already have 2 landowners who have approached us and are looking to do projects in 2022. to do something similar, establish some bird-friendly haying operations on their farms.
Good afternoon, everyone. So through Ontario Power Generation, we are on year 2 of a 3-year project to do some work in J. Henry Tweed Conservation Area, specifically some erosion control work. And the way we're doing this work is we're looking at bioengineering, so doing a more naturalized shoreline as opposed to the standard riprap treatment. So we've worked really closely with our engineering department to come up with a design that will work for the erosion issues and the high flows that the system experiences, but also that will create that more naturalized shoreline that we want to see in the park. So the designs have been completed by engineering, and now we're going to move into the process of applying for the permits we need and review by Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And then we will begin construction in August of next year after the timing window for in-water work. So we're looking forward to it. It was a similar project was done in 2019 at a different section along this creek, and we're doing something very similar, and it's worked very well at that other section. It's held up very nicely for the past 2 years, 2 springs, and we're going to replicate that at another location. Yes, Fred.
Does the creek have a name yet?
I think through the park it doesn't have a formal name, but it's the Little and Cherry municipal drain further up. So we just we could call, you know, we haven't really given it a name per se. Some of the residents might have a name they call it. There's often, you know, local names you could say for some of these systems, but not that I know of.
Yeah. I think it's important to capture the names, make sure all the streams have names, and that they're consistent. And you know, over here in the Rideau, we have this movement to call Kempville Creek the South Branch of the Rideau River, and then we have all the upstream tributaries have ambiguous names.
Yes, watercourse names are definitely challenging for sure. And this slide is just a quick update on our partnership with Ducks Unlimited Canada. So if you recall at the last board meeting, I mentioned that we started a new 3-year partnership with them to do a suite of wetland restoration projects between now and the end of 2023. So we're looking primarily at projects on SNC property, but we are also going to work with other public lands such as the counties, or even potentially private land. And we already do have 2 projects where the private landowners are very interested in doing some work on their property that we're looking at, we're scoping out at this time. So the picture on the slide shows one of the SNC properties. This is just north of Castleman, where we're looking at doing a little bit of work, nothing, you know, too extravagant, but there are some areas where beavers have been active in the past, and the plantation has failed, and we're going to be looking at doing work in that area where the plantation had failed. It's very wet, and just augment the wetland in that spot, and as well create some smaller pools adjacent as well to the larger one. We're working with Ducks Unlimited on a press release regarding the partnership. We're just waiting for confirmation from them about acknowledging the funding source.
And SNC is going at wetlands from all kinds of angles these days. So as Michelle said, we're doing some work restoring wetlands. This is a little bit of info on a project to protect some of the wetlands existing on the landscape. So the Township of Alfred Plantagenet was interested in remapping their wetlands in their municipality in order to know where they are. So SNC is partnering with them to do that project. We're currently working to map all wetlands in their municipality over 2 hectares in size. And concurrently, the township's working with their councillors and staff to enact a bylaw to protect all these wetlands, and they'll be considered locally significant wetlands that are located within their natural heritage system. And it's a good way to protect forest cover in this area as well as provide some flood protection, as most of the wetlands in this area of our watershed are swamp woodlands. So a good way to protect forest cover on the landscape. And also worth noting is the municipality has recently adopted this as a priority action in their 2021 strategic plan.
Can't hear you, Ryan, for some reason.
Is it better now?
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, because I guess my headset's not working. So just a quick update on SNC hunting for 2021. We're up actually this year on numbers. We had 98 hunting people, hunters out there, 90 permits sold, 4 trappers. So we're up from, I think, what was it, 85 hunters last year on SNC property. So a good trend starting is actually, even though we charge $100 per permit, hunter numbers are still going up. So it's a positive thing.
Oh, sorry, a question from Stefan.
Yep.
Stefan, you are muted. You'll need to unmute yourself. You should find the unmute button on the top. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, Ryan, could you advise on any sort of inspection, or I wouldn't call it enforcement, but check on any compliance? Was there any crew out there checking for people's permit and that sort of thing? Like, did we?
No, this year we did actually. You know what? This year there was very few complaints. There was no real issue this year for whatever reason. Last year in the past, I did. I wouldn't call it patrolling, but I just take a little drive, make sure that we would make a presence, we make ourselves visible. But we're always out and about. We didn't actually go looking for any kind of type of violation, but we didn't have any reports of anything. So, I mean, everything was fine this year.
Is there anything in the future to improve maybe the way of knowing who's hunting in compliance and who is not, like by mean of putting something on the windshield or something like that?
Yeah.
Like, I know people got their card and their letters, but my point is there are a number of people going out there that don't buy the permit. And right now, like, you get to a property where somebody's hunting, you're basically just moving along because there's always somebody there. So I guess what I'm getting at is people that are paying their permit are not necessarily getting the area that they get to hunt because others are there and potentially without permits. So I get the fact that there's no complaint, but my point is there's no way of knowing who's out there illegally, type of thing. So like, I don't mind, like other people, buying my permit every year. I enjoy being out on the properties, but it gets a little frustrated to know that others are out there without buying this $100 permit. And
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, we're looking into that actually for 2022 is basically a card that we can kind of keep in your windshield. So you get to a site in the morning, you go by a vehicle, you can basically tell whether or not this person has purchased a license for that, for an SNC property. The other thing actually Brent and I were even talking about, because we came across a tree stand on one of our properties, is even like a small, almost like a key tag that you could put actually on the bottom of a tree stand. So you know that this person, they have bought their permit, and you know that this stand belongs to somebody that does hunt here. So that is something that we're going to look at for 2022. And another thing we're going to look at is a mandatory hunting report. It's just been the last couple of years that M&R has come out with the reporting online. They used to report, they used to do a hunt camp report, but it was kind of spotty because it didn't cover pretty much everybody in the WMU. So we're looking at some type of digital mandatory hunt report card, actually, just like we get from the trappers. So that's in the works for 2022.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, there's a question from Malcolm.
Go ahead, Malcolm. You're also muted. You'll need to mute.
Yeah, there we go. Just wondering, how many are those permits for birds or deer?
Well, that's what we don't know. You see, if we get this this mandatory hunt card out, so it's going to tell you basically what did you see? You know, are we seeing turkey on the property, wolves, that type of thing. So it's going to give us a handle on. In a few years, we can come out with some really cool statistics. But we like right now, so we don't know how many people are out there hunting turkey. We don't know if we have coyote hunters. That type of thing. So it's going to be a really cool tool to have.
So Malcolm, right now, it's just a hunting permission. It doesn't specify specifically for what. Bill also has a question. Yeah, go ahead.
My concern is much the same as that's been stated. We have no way of checking, and if I'm pretty sure that Bill is on that property without a permit, it becomes difficult for me to say or do anything if he thinks he's been there for a number of years. And many people, and I think of between Chesterville and Morwood and the swamp there's some land that belongs to North Dundas, there's some that belongs to South Nation, there's some belongs to the United Counties. And so it's difficult to know exactly where and how to be there. And most of the people down there, I don't think, have an idea of who owns what. They just have hunted there for a long time and they think it's theirs.
Yeah, and really, you know, it's the onus is on the hunter themselves to make sure that they're on the correct property, they're on the correct chunk of land. There's not too many excuses for that anymore. You can come into South Nation. We can provide shape files with all our properties. So you can put that on your phone and you'll know which property you're on. But it is nice to know, like, just to have a peace of mind that, you know, like the people that, like you guys are all right. You know, I spent my $100 here. I want to hunt in peace. I don't want anybody, you know, spoiling my hunt. So that's what we're trying to do. These are the things that we're going to kind of look into for 2022 to see if we can make everything a bit more I guess streamlined, a bit more easier, a bit more user friendly.
I'm not sure I fully agree with this, but there was a suggestion a number of years ago that perhaps we should be assigning areas if people requested them, and if they had the hunting permit, that John would have a particular area and that would be his area rather than having people being peeved about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure for whatever reason that that approach didn't get adopted. I think I don't know if Larry had a comment at that about one time or any idea. I don't remember why it didn't go that way. It's a delicate thing. You know, like you said, people have been hunting in areas for so long, and then for somebody to come in and you know, snatch up a chunk of land because they might have some more money than this other fellow. It's a touchy thing, and I think maybe that's the avenue or the reason why we didn't go that avenue. We tried to leave it more along like a public land kind of, just basically how M&R does it. I mean, they have public land, and it's up to the user to, you know, to use it fairly and with other users. Like, again, we could be sitting up in a tree stand and somebody can go just hiking through in front of you just because they don't have to be necessarily hunting, but it could still spoil your hunt. So it's a tough thing to assign a chunk of land to, I think, a certain group. But I mean, again, we could always bring it up to the table and look into it for 2022 or future years.
Yeah, so I do have, Angela is on actually and does have a comment to present. And Stefan, I'm not sure if you still have a question or not, but we'll go to Ange first. And then if you have a follow-up question, just put your hand back up again for us.
Thank you.
It's okay, Rhonda. If Steph wants to go ahead first, I'll hear his comment and then I can chime in.
Stefan,
Yes, the issue about assigning people to property is problematic both on the user side of things and the enforcement part of it. So for example, right now, like if we have a deer season on, somebody could go out there hunting deer, and then you could have somebody who says, you know what, I don't hunt deer, but I hunt squirrel or I hunt rabbit or grouse. And they both have access to the property. It's kind of the unwritten rule where the ethics sort of precede all of that sort of thing. Like where you see somebody hunting in that area, and all respect, you move on to another area. And that's just the common sense approach. Anything beyond that would be extremely difficult and confusing for any kind of user. And then let alone the enforcement part would be a nightmare. So I think the way it is now is appropriate. The only thing that I would like to see, both as a hunter and also a member of the committee, is maybe have some kind of signage on the windshield, something that's easy for our staff to go and look at without disturbing anybody. If you happen to see somebody on the side of the road, that's easy enough to do a check. But beyond that, I think it would be unreasonable personally. Like I don't think they expect staff to go in the bush to check license while people are up in the tree stand with loaded shotgun. That's unreasonable. So that's my point of view. I think the way it is now is fine. But if we were to add something on the weed shield, which is part of the requirement, if you see somebody who's parked there and is entering a property and doesn't have his permit displayed, I think that's ground for maybe filing a complaint, getting a plate number, and getting somebody to do a bit of a follow-up. And it's difficult also. We have to be mindful that enforcement is done by the MNR, right? The only thing we have is something under the Trespass to Property Act that regulates activity on a property. So I think we got to be careful with how we do inspection versus call it enforcement. I wouldn't call it enforcement personally, but that's my views and my comment based on law enforcement experience.
Thank you, Stefan. Andrew, do you want to go ahead?
I'll like just to say that I think that Stefan's approach advocated is the one, that I think, of course, we may not do active patrols, but I certainly did my own patrols this year as I drove up and down roads where we had properties, and I agree. The enforcement of an indicator of some type, knowing that the SNC land, the person has purchased a permit, a quick way to verify that something on the dashboard is sufficient and practical, and the regime of setting up some type of an exclusive hunting right is not something that we have the administration nor the I think appetite for at this time, but we can always have a more fulsome discussion. But the revenues must always, and I have a presentation coming up, but the revenues from such thing always has to justify the cost of what you're doing. So the program as it's being implemented now, I think makes sense, and a simple way to have a quick verification of if a person that's hunting at a property has paid the proper fee is simply to have that available on the vehicle alongside the road. I think that's very practical, and it sounds like Stefan and I have had the same drive-bys or drive-throughs this year and the same experience. So I think it's a good suggestion and one that I will work with staff to implement.
I saw Malcolm's hand go up and then come down. Malcolm, did you have a question before I go to Bill?
Just a comment that I certainly agree with the sticker idea. It's always been my experience on Crown land that it's first come, first serve. So if you're there, or if you see there's somebody's there, you just don't go. As far as reporting, we certainly have to report to the ministry of our results or non-results of our hunt. And I would think it would be an easy one to ask them to include you in on the report for their hunt. That's about all.
Okay, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, two comments. I think I'd heard in the past that the staff had interacted with ministry about that. So whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, but that can be commented on. The question I have is completely different. Do we have any kind of signage up? Because when hunting is on, saying that hunting may be taking place, so that if I want to go with my family for a walk, I'm not walking past shotgun wielding guys in stands?
So we do have property signage up identifying the properties, but they don't specifically identify on that signage hunting versus no hunting. Our public geoportal does though, so you can go online and see which properties are open to hunting and which are not. Any formalized trail systems do not allow for hunting, so anywhere place that we have actual trails, There is no hunting on those properties in any close proximity to those. Ryan, did you have additional information to add there?
Yeah, we also, communications also puts out a press release, at least a week or two before the season, just notifying everybody of the upcoming hunting seasons, just to make sure that everyone's well aware of what's going on out there in the landscape.
Yes, and social media to remind folks to wear their orange when they're out and about. Okay. Any other questions or comments? We do have one final slide from Michelle. Seeing none, I'll move on.
Thanks, Rhonda. So exciting slide. Next year marks the 75th anniversary for South Nation Conservation. So a great milestone for the authority. And there's a suite of events or commemorative activities that are going to be taking place throughout the year to recognize that 75th anniversary. So keep your eyes peeled for press releases, social media posts, all that for all those different events, and definitely participate if you're able to. It should be some great events coming up throughout the year. Fred.
And then Bill.
Yeah, we do have a committee member who does logos for organizations, so you might ask her to design the logo.
I do believe we have a firm engaged, and actually our communications committee at their meeting a few weeks ago did take a look at the draft, so that is in the works and will be ready for launch in the new year. But thank you, Fred, for that suggestion. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, I want to encourage all of you to watch for the 75-kilometer challenge. It's really, I think, worthwhile for all of us. And it can be snowshoeing or skating, or I don't know what skating, but snowshoeing or canoeing or jogging, or there are all sorts of things you can do to show you're a participant over the year. So watch that one especially, and I'll be watching to see how many of you join in.
Challenge.
Thanks, Bill.
More details to come. So that concludes our staff update. Mr. Chair, we can move on to item, excuse me, 5, the approval of the Fish and Wildlife Committee meeting minutes from the September 7th, 2021 meeting. They're found on pages 3 to 7 in your agenda package. And we will be looking for a mover and seconder to approve those minutes. If we could have that, and then any discussion. So I'm seeing Malcolm, thank you. And a seconder, Sean, thank you. Are there any questions, corrections, errors, or omissions that you wish to bring up at the moment regarding the minutes? Seeing none, Mr. Chair, we can call the question on that motion.
Okay, they seemed harmless to me. Of course, they're very sketchy, as they always are. So does anyone have objections to approving the minutes?
Seeing none, that motion is carried. I did not have any business arising in my notes unless there's anything the committee wishes follow up on from those minutes.
I would just ask if we've had any more contact with the people from Hoople Creek.
I don't believe we received any updates since the delegation at the last meeting. We will let you know if we do, but to my knowledge, no follow-up since the September presentation, at least not yet.
Their Facebook site seems relatively inactive. They had a 3-page newsletter that came out on the 1st of November, and that's the latest on their Facebook.
All right, so that brings us to our new business. The first item on new business is an update on the Conservation Authorities Act Phase 1 regulations from Angela.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Maybe. Sounds good. I got a nod from Fred. Thank you. I have to apologize in advance for anybody who's already heard this presentation a number of times. So I hope that you learn something new every time that you hear it. So thank you for your ongoing attention as we present this. Basically, as many of you know, a series of changes have occurred to the Conservation Authorities Act, basically dating back to about some initial discussion starting in 2017 from the Minister's Office of Changes to Conservation Authorities. Basically, all of these changes have accumulated in what is now a set of regulations on mandatory programs that was released in October of 2021. And so I wanted to go through some of the regulation changes that happened earlier in 2021, as well as discussing a little bit about the regulation that has dropped, that will come into effect on January 1st of 2022. And just to, continue to engage with the committees, as you know, South Nation and myself personally and the board of directors do have a very high value that we place on committee feedback. We don't pretend that our model is a perfect model, and we're not always going to agree on everything that we discuss together as a staff, a board, and committee members, but it does provide a good venue and certainly a good avenue to have a number of discussions about the programs and services that we offer at the Conservation Authority. Next slide, please. I'll go pretty quick and just overall to say that a number of discussions have taken place on the Conservation Authorities Act, and we're now looking at those implications and how they affect our budgets going into 2022, 2023, and effectively final implementation in 2024. Next slide, please. This first piece of legislation came into place in February 2021. It came out of discussions that happened late in 2020 with some of the COVID Budget Measures Act. And there were some changes to conservation authorities and the work that we do. But the substance of the February regulations, I'll just go through those quickly. You'll recall some of these, hopefully, maybe. The council of a participating municipality has to make sure that the appointments it makes to the Conservation Authority's Board of Directors come from effectively what is usually an elected political official. There is, however, an opportunity there to request a minister's exemption if a municipality wishes to do otherwise. And also, it's important to note that all of the current public representatives or public appointments are entitled to complete their terms, concluding at the 2022 election that's coming up. So we have a municipal election in the fall of 2022, and the sitting appointments are entitled to carry out their terms without requiring that amendment. Next slide, please. The part two is that really, we do have a few seats that are public appointments, but largely we do have a lot of mayors and sitting councillors that are board members. And where a municipality wants to request an exemption, we certainly see that they can easily do so, and the Conservation Authority is happy to help them with that process. Largely, those appointments and whether they're granted or not seems to be political prerogative. That's just what it looks like externally, and there's no clarity otherwise as to how, or a criterion as to how those appointments are granted or denied. Next slide, please. In terms of board composition, it's important to note that our conservation authority, as it was, would have been made up of many, many lower tier municipalities back in the day, probably upwards of about 24 municipalities. Then prior to amalgamation, we've been condensed down to 16 member municipalities, but still from there, based on apportionment and representation by population that is, our board has been further sort of through an order in council been further streamlined to include 13 member representatives. So that order in council, it's requested that that was provided to the minister, which we did, and we provided a copy on our website as well. Next slide, please. The chair and vice chair, as a matter of practice at South Nation and in accordance with our administrative bylaws, really required that we rotate the terms of the chair And we tried to always have chair terms being not more than 1 or 2 terms of office, without a change between one of the City of Ottawa, the United Counties of Prescott Russell, United Counties of Leeds Grenville, and Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry. So practically, this term is something that was already in our bylaws and something that we'll have no trouble meeting. However, it's important to note that again, should a conservation authority, have a reason for making sure that they wish to do an appointment, they could simply ask the minister for an exception for this rule as well. Criterion again seems to be largely political prerogative for the granting or denial of said appointment or extension. Agricultural representatives, again, the minister has the ability under their discretion to appoint a conservation authority with an agricultural representative. Also key to note that the agricultural representatives' voting rights would be restricted because they would have certain limits on, for example, matters having to deal with levy. They would not have a vote. So again, important to note that we have existing committees with agricultural representation, and we would hope that the minister, should they decide to make an appointment to a board, would either consult the Conservation Authority or at minimum consult the local federations of agriculture to assure that the appointment would be in line with what those agricultural organizations thought appropriate for such an appointment. Next slide, please. Basically, again, the accounting requirements meant that generally accepted accounting principles for local governments had to be followed by conservation authorities. It was no issue for us in that we were already following generally accepted accounting principles for local governments. Next slide. A certain number of public documents must appear on our website, include meeting agendas, meeting minutes, and audited financials. These documents are currently available on our website and were available before the regulation was passed. Next slide. The I guess basically codification or clarification that staff would have to receive landowner consent to enter onto private property for CA projects. They give examples such as surveying and water quality monitoring. These are things that we have always done as a practice. We've never gone onto private property without asking the landowner's permission. So that's just clarified in the act. That's nothing that we would have ever done without seeking landowner permission. And of course, I had in my presentation this morning, and important to note that where you have a matter of urgency, such as our regulatory powers under the Conservation Authorities Act, and where you'd have a direct risk to life or property, the provincial offenses officer, would seek consent as the first approach, but in an emergency situation would still have the authority to enter on if needed. It's clear in the new regulations that the CA's power to expropriate land is repealed. Again, I think that was actually good news for us considering our situation at Castleman to Lemieux. I think what the minister thought when they made this regulation was that it simply would restrict a conservation authority's power to expropriate land for things such as trails and trail improvements, etc. I don't know exactly that the whole idea about natural hazards and hazards land and regarding expropriation was fully considered, but I guess we would have to ask the drafters of the legislation and not speculate. So I was actually pleased to see our power to expropriate land is repealed, particularly considering very significant hazard land considerations. Next slide, please. So basically, the regulatory consultation guide came out in May of this year, and it was out from May till June. Some of the bullet points in my slide require updating. The regulatory paper discussed what would appear in pending regulations, defining core and mandated programs, and set us up some timelines to prepare what they're calling a transition plan as well as a municipal agreement. Those regulations, oh, Rhonda, you are good. You got this. Thank you. The regulations were released in mid-October, and the results of the specific public consultation have not been released. However, we do know that the minister received over 400 comments from municipalities, residents, conservation authorities, and other stakeholder groups regarding their consultation paper on the draft regulations. Next slide, please. So what have we been doing to discuss and prepare? Well, we did approve our transition plan with the board last meeting, which was our November meeting. The transition plan is a pretty simple, high-level work plan that discusses the process that we will take to develop our programs and services inventory. The work plan, the transition plan, is due at the end of December and will be circulated to municipalities in early December for their review. It's not really for their review and comment, but it's almost simultaneous when it goes to the minister before December 31st of this year. And then we have to come up with our inventory of programs and services at the beginning of February of next year. So to prepare for that, each month we've been discussing with the board of directors all of the programs and services that we offer, as well as some of the discussion on where that may land in the mandatory quote unquote classification of programs and services. Of note, the regulations, one thing, primarily that South Nation was concerned about was the categorization of water and erosion control infrastructure as well as conservation lands as part of our mandatory programming. You'll know we're a fairly large watershed. We own a lot of land. And all of the work that we do on our conservation lands to maintain those properties and keep them fit for passive recreation has been identified as what is considered mandatory programming, and thus programming that can be funded and supported by the levy. So we were very pleased to see that, very pleased to see all the water and erosion control infrastructure, source protection, etc. One thing to keep in mind for committees such as Fish and Wildlife and other stewardship programs is that we will have to have a more lengthy discussion about some of the works that we do in what are called sort of pure stewardship categories, as that work relates to climate change, development, water and water types of understanding. Some of that monitoring was all included as as a mandatory program and service, but some of the more things that are a little bit outside of that are things like the tree planting, etc. So we need to find ways to make sure that they fit the targets of the municipalities as we move forward. Having said that, I, read that legislation in, with one eye, and then I note that we are required to do a very large watershed study. And some of the more primary recommendations, two of the primary recommendations of our basin study on which this authority is formed is basically that deforestation in this watershed is a significant concern because it, attenuates or increases the flow of waters over the landscape and into the receivers. So two things were identified as key in this watershed in the basin study, and I expect we'll still see them. So two things that are not currently considered under the mandatory head, which is reforestation of lands to make sure that they're, doing their function, ecological function on the landscape. And the other thing is land acquisition. Now, land maintenance is all included in there, but land acquisition is also a question mark. So those are key programs that were at the foundation of the beginning of this watershed and this watershed organization. So I'm interested to see how that unfolds. And I think that the upcoming months will be, lots of discussions, and we may as committee members require, your support and feedback as we go forward onto this. But with that, I do want to thank, all of you for your attention, number one, but also I want to thank the staff as that work in this area, the stewardship area, for being very much resilient as we work through COVID. We continue to plant record numbers of trees. We continue to do record numbers of studies and analysis for our municipalities as it relates to many types of projects that they've asked us with their help on. And the staff have been really great to continue not only the monitoring that we've done for a number of years that forms a lot of our baseline and documentation, but to be adaptable. In the slides that you see from folks like Naomi, Ryan, and Kat and Brent, all the staff that were presenting today. Sorry, Michelle, left you out of there. You know, that showed how the work is integrating and going across the organization. It's certainly my hope to keep the all of those projects at the forefront of everybody's mind, because they help inform all of the work that that we do. And staff have been very adaptable in completing, like I said, not only what they have always done, but assisting with treatments on our land, better understanding of our water courses for the climate change and flood work that we're doing, and certainly all the feedback and input that we receive from committee members throughout our programs and services. So with that, I'm open to questions. That's just our levy apportionment and just telling you where we are on our budget schedule for this year. And with that, I will take any questions that you have.
I do see a hand from Doug. Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. For Angela, this is the third time I've heard your presentation, and I did learn something new today that I didn't before. I noticed in one of the slides, it says the City of Ottawa would have to get minister approval to appoint more than one public member. Currently, they have 2. So is that a reduction back to 1, and then they'd have to get permission to add a second one?
That's currently as the regulation reads. All existing appointments can sit out their terms, and then from there, starting the next election, yes, Doug, that would be correct. However, in having said that, when that point was, I believe, discussed in the feedback that was provided, and the city did ask that question directly, they also did indicate that it can be challenging sometimes to have, as you well know, to have all 4 of those positions, or certainly 3 of those positions, be sitting councillors, as there's conflicts with committee scheduling, etc. So, but that's exactly what it means. Yes.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Fred, go ahead.
So what has happened in terms of conservation authorities having committees like we are? And at one point, there was a requirement that members of committees should all live within the territory of the Conservation Authority. And some of us live about 1.5 kilometers outside of the South Nation watershed.
Oh, there are so many iterations of this, Fred. It's nice to hear that you remember them all. Sometimes you remind me of things I've forgotten about. So without being without being curt on this, right, there was an omnibus bill that all the board members would have to be from different backgrounds, and all these things. Where it landed is the requirement for community advisory board, which is what they were calling that board. So there's the board of directors, then there was to be a community advisory board. That requirement was removed from the regulations. It was removed. It didn't make it into the mandatory programs and services or any discussion thereof. So they have removed that as of this time. That doesn't mean we can't continue with our committees, but for all conservation authorities to set them up, that has basically gone away. That requirement has gone away.
I thought that was the one good thing about the changes, but
I think you and a few people thought that. I guess I don't know. I was expecting that we would see that, but that piece has gone away. Sort of the lingo around it is what people are saying is a lot of conservation authorities already have such a thing, and where they don't, there should always be an opportunity for or a venue for people to provide feedback. I don't know that, that's true of everyone, but certainly in our case, I know we definitely, a community advisory board would be redundant for us probably because we have many of them, but I don't know. I think that they're good, and it is too bad that that went away, I think.
I'm seeing no additional questions for Angela. So we can move on to our next agenda item, which is 7B. The 2021 year-end report from Michelle found on pages 8 to 10.
Thanks, Rhonda. So this is the year-end report that we bring to the committee every year at this time that basically summarizes, in a snapshot, all of the activities that we completed throughout 2021. And it follows a similar structure that we have in our budget so that we can take a look at the deliverables that we had put in the budget and see how those deliverables were met throughout the year. And we go into a little bit more detail in these reports so you have a more fulsome understanding of all the work that was undertaken. But I don't want to go through it, line by line. You have it there in front of you to review. But basically, we did a whole suite of monitoring work throughout the watershed this past year. We did focus in the South Bearbrook catchment area quite a bit, and that was through a special project we had with the City of Ottawa under Eastern Ontario Water Resources Program funding. So we're going to be doing a detailed catchment study report early on in the new year and have that finalized for the City of Ottawa. And it basically gives a detailed summary of the conditions of the catchment and provides recommendations for areas that may require future study or areas in need of restoration. We also continue our monitoring through the 2 provincial networks that we are a part of, the Provincial Water Quality Monitoring Network and the Provincial Groundwater Monitoring Network, as Kat mentioned in the slideshow. So we did do monthly water sampling as well through the City of Ottawa baseline sampling program. We have a special levy program there where we complete the monitoring monthly at specific sites within the city on behalf of the City of Ottawa. And we've been doing that for the past 4 years now. And next year will be the 5th year that we do that. As well, we had a number of projects that we were doing throughout the watershed. Some of them existing projects that you've seen for a number of years now. So the Species at Risk Benefits Exchange is one that's been going on for quite a while, and it continues. And Ontario Power Generation, like I mentioned in the slideshow, is another one that's been ongoing this year, and it will be ongoing again next year as well. Next year will be the final year for that specific 3-year project. As well, we did partway through the year, we received some special funding from Environment and Climate Change Canada to do additional monitoring at our vernal pool projects for the Western Chorus frog. So that monitoring was ongoing, and there's a report coming up where you'll hear a little bit about the help we had on that one. And then also we're provided some funding from Environment and Climate Change Canada to do some monitoring of past turtle nesting habitat enhancement projects. And I don't know if you recall, I brought that to the committee previously, but we went out throughout the turtle nesting season and took a look at the sites where we had done enhancement projects in the past, and Environment Canada was curious to see how the projects were doing, 10 years after they've been created. And we also provided a report with some recommendations on what could be done to enhance the sites or what shouldn't be done, that sort of thing, lessons learned. And they'll be taking that information and looking at their some of their permitting to see in cases where they ask for enhancement or offsets for turtle nesting habitat, they will use this information to look at some of the monitoring plans that they ask for. As you know, we also have our new partnership with Ducks Unlimited Canada, so that was something new as well that started partway through the year, and we're very excited about that partnership and looking forward to getting some projects on the ground beginning early in the new year. And Grasslands Ontario is another one, as Brent mentioned in the slideshow. We did have a project on an SNC property at the Healing Place where we're doing work there, and that's proceeded very well. And we still have some activities that are going to happen in 2022 on that one. So you'll see more information on that at our spring meeting. And then finally, we also had some success applying to the Canadian Wildlife Federation for a grant to do some pollinator habitat restoration. And that's a project that you'll see in 2022. We're going to be doing a little bit of work at the Mill Run Conservation Area, creating a pollinator meadow. And we've been working also with Canadian Wildlife Federation staff. They've been trying to engage municipalities to look at doing different management along roadsides. And we've had some contact from some of our local municipalities who are interested in doing some work and potentially have pilot projects in the new year. So as those municipalities reach out and ask for some support, we're definitely helping them through through that and applying for funding where possible. So just a quick snapshot of the 2021 for you.
So we do have a resolution to receive and file this report on page 8. So if we can get a mover and seconder, and then we can address any questions that you may have. So looking for a mover and seconder to receive and file Michelle's report.
Come on, somebody's got it.
Thank you. Yeah, if you can use the raise your hand function, but don't, thank you, Malcolm. Have everyone's video feed visible. Perfect. Thank you, Stefan. We'll get you the next one. Are there any questions for Michelle? Stefan, did you have a question?
No, I have no questions. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. I'll just go put your hand down for you. Okay, seeing no further questions, Mr. Chair, you can go ahead and call the question for that.
Okay, we'll call the question. It just seems as usual that there's a lot of stuff getting done and it's being done well. So if anyone's opposed.
Seeing none, that motion is carried. And we get to move along to probably one of the nicer reports on the agenda today. Naomi, I'll pass it over to you for item C.
Thank you, Rhonda. So I'm happy to do this next report to recognize a volunteer that helped us out greatly this summer. Kirk Myaldi lives in the area of Bourget and helped us out quite a bit by going to the vernal pools that are located on the South Nation property that's on Bouvier Road. We've been, as you've heard over the last couple of years, the project that's unfolded on that property, as well as one, excuse me, in the south end of our watershed, where we had some vernal pools constructed within a forest. So the project, was to help western chorus frogs, and the ponds are being monitored to see how they're functioning, to see if they are encouraging aquatic species to use them. And so Kirk's assistance for this project helped to, spare some of our resources. It took the time to travel and staff expenses to go out there. And so we're very appreciative of Kirk's help. And we have a little gift for you. I don't know if you can see it there. It's a little bit blurry. There we go. So Kirk, I'll have to find out from you how to get that to you.
Well, thanks very much, and keep me in mind for the next job, right? I'm looking for
Sure,
something else. Okay.
Great.
And are you issuing reprimands for those of us who said we'd go to the other ponds and listen and then didn't?
No. I know it was very difficult, COVID and all the restrictions on things that people could do. It's been very challenging for everyone. So, but it was nice to have Kirk's help because, well, it's a bit of a drive from the office. It's at least 45 minutes to get out there. And then even though it's a really nice walk through the woods, it does help out a lot to have somebody take over that aspect of monitoring.
So Bill does have.
It was actually nice. It looked like I was working and I was just sitting there in the forest, so it was all right.
Thank you, Kirk. Bill also has something to add.
Kirk, on behalf of the board, I want to say a big thank you for all of the extra work you've done. Volunteers are the lifeblood of our organization, and it's people like you that make for a lot of success we've had. Now, the question I have for you is, did you hear any of the western chorus frogs in your excursions?
No, I did not, and I varied my hours. Different times of day, right from early morning to evening, but I did not hear any. No, I thought I saw one once, but Naomi corrected me and it wasn't. So, but no, I did not hear any.
So are there plans to get forest frogs from the Trudeau lab, where they're raising them?
That's been discussed. We haven't made any firm plans. It's something that we could explore if it, if it ever comes up. There is one aspect of the criteria for the Western chorus frog for the habitat of those ponds. Initially, that site was supposed to have been logged, and we had built the vernal pools with the hopes that in the thinking that because that property has been scheduled to be harvested. So it's maybe a little bit too treed at this moment to entice Western chorus frog there, but eventually the site will be logged. So it'll be a little bit more open and hopefully more enticing to Western chorus frog because they are in the vicinity. I did hear them across the road in a property owned by the Prescott Russell, and Manon Besnaire, who's the forester over at La Rose Forest, also heard them there. They're also monitoring for species at risk. And so we have confirmation that they're in the area, but we just need to encourage them to come to that site.
Yeah, and we are listening for chorus frogs here at home. It's only in years that have a wet spring and a wet August that they disperse, and so the weather, even if the new ponds are a suitable habitat, the weather may not have been right for them to move this year.
Yes, exactly. We've been struggling with that because since we've constructed the ponds, we haven't really had ideal weather. Well, we had a dry season in 2020 and the ponds dried up. In fact, the tadpoles that were in the pools died as a result. And same thing happened this past year. The ponds dried up too quickly. So, challenge.
A quick question. How long does it take from the aid to they're able to go out of the pools?
Fred, do you know that off the top of your head? I can't remember how many days.
The number that's talked about is 90 days, so it's 3 months. So they lay at the beginning of April, and so you have to have water in April, May, and June. In our little vernal pool, which doesn't have chorus frogs, this year they dried up in the middle of June, and I rescued the salamanders, which are what are in our pool, and brought them back and had them in a fiberglass container around the house, and they all transformed, but the pools didn't fill up again enough to release the salamanders back into the pond.
All right. Well, our recommendation on page 11 is that the Fish and Wildlife Committee recognize Kurt Midal for his time, effort, and dedication to SNC for helping to collect the Bourget vernal pool water levels and listening for Western chorus frog calls in 2021. And I had Stefan's hand up for the last one, so we'll take him as the mover. Can we have a seconder? Bill, thank you.
And we'll move the question if anyone's opposed.
Seeing none, that is carried, and our thanks to you again, Kirk, and we'll arrange to get your gift of appreciation to you. So moving on to
thanks very much.
Sure. Moving on to last report under new business. Again, a housekeeping. At the last meeting of each year, we do try to set our committee meeting dates for the following year. So we're following the same meeting schedule that we had in 2021, which would put our first meeting of the year on March 3rd. Just to note that is a Thursday, not the regular Tuesday, at 3 p.m. with the joint standing committee meeting the same day at 1 p.m. We are waiting to see if that committee meeting will proceed or not. So we'll let you know for sure regarding the standing committee as we get closer to that date. Ideally, those meetings are best in person. We won't be in a position to do in-person meetings by March. So we need to have a little bit of a discussion internally to see if we can host a good meeting of the joint committees virtually. And if we can't do that, we may postpone as we did this year. So we will confirm the standing committee meeting for you closer to the date, but your first regular meeting will be March 3rd at 3 p.m. And then June 7th, September 6th, and November 29th. Again, they're currently scheduled for Tuesdays on those last 3 meetings at 3 p.m. If anyone has any particular issues with Tuesday evenings, now would be a good time to identify that. Or if any of those dates for any reason pop into your mind as not great, we can address those now. Otherwise, we'll be looking for a resolution to approve the meeting schedule as presented. Doug? I believe is moving that. Thank you, Doug. We have a seconder. Thank you, Kirk. Are there any known issues right now with any of those proposed dates that you'd like to address before our chair calls the question? I will note that we have budgeted for a hybrid meeting approach in 2022. So we are hoping that at some point moving into the new year that we will be able to have an in-person meeting. That may be in the form of an outdoor meeting when the weather is nicer, but definitely the March meeting at this point will be virtual. So seeing no conflicts with the proposed dates, Mr. Chair, we can go ahead and call the question on that one.
Okay, we'll call the question.
Seeing no opposition, that is carried. We do not have a supplemental today, and we didn't have any correspondence to share either. So we can move right down to our roundtable discussions. So again, this is an opportunity first and foremost to capture any community engagement activities that the community members would like to share. And once we finish that, we can have a discussion on watershed monitoring report. So we'll start with the community engagement. And if anyone has, I know it's a bit challenging with the pandemic. There's not that many events out there, but if you have anything you'd like to share, please feel free to do so now. Go ahead, Bill.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I make sure I interact with people in our community regularly, but I also do a presentation to the North Dundas Council, and I do that every 6 weeks or so, and give them an update and encourage them to be aware of, and they are quite appreciative of it. But I wanted to mention as well that the South Nation budget has now been approved tentatively. And I might add that this is the first year it's been done like this, and part of it is to make sure that we're giving everybody a chance to have input that may wish it. And in some of the authorities, there was concern that it wasn't open enough and it wasn't available enough. We haven't heard that here, but we're following this procedure. The draft budget was tentatively approved on our last meeting a couple weeks ago. Sorry, a week or so ago. And now the draft budget will be sent out to municipalities. We have 16 of them, and to other groups that are interested in looking over. They will offer suggestions or comments or questions, and they will be incorporated, and we will look at it and approve the budget, hopefully at the January meeting in 22. So that's one little change we're making. I think it's now on the website. And so you may wish to look in and see the number of dollars that are looked at. Also, the staff needs to be complimented, and I do it regularly, and I know you people do too, because they do, well, let's do it this way. 60% of the budget comes from the 16 different municipalities, but 40% of the budget comes from the diligence of our staff as they review and look for areas that they can find grants, and they do get grants for about 40% of what we're doing here. So that extends what we can do in this watershed by, well, quite a bit, almost half. And so compliments and thanks to them for the extra work they do. And if you're looking at this budget, you may particularly be interested in looking at page 8. Page 8 has a summary of over the last year or two of what grants are paid by what municipalities and how much, and the percentages that each municipality pays. So that's of interest, and it was of interest to me, and I think it may be to you. So thank you very much, and that's my general comments.
Thank you, Bill. Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, my main sort of activity along those lines was getting our North Grenville staff engaged through our environmental advisory committee with Michelle for the pollinator garden approach to roadsides, and we just had our meeting yesterday, and the staff are looking at one of the roads near Kempville to have, sort of pollinator garden style roadsides along that. And another thing I've been doing is collecting DNA samples for a lab at Queens, who are proposing to do environmental DNA, which is you take a water sample and you have polymerase chain reaction amplification of DNA that's in the water, and so you can identify what what species are living in that stream upstream of where you took the water sample, and you can find a lot of things. I mean, the classic example is they started to do this in Quebec, and there was a stream where they found water snake DNA that they didn't know there were water snakes, and then Jean-Francois de Roche went out and found water snakes in that stream, and so this is going to, when this gets going, it's really going to change the way we assess what's living in streams, and they're just working at direct tributaries to the St. Lawrence and eastern end of Lake Ontario now, but I'm sure that we're going to be doing a lot of this in the future.
Thanks, Fred. Anybody else have anything to add on the community engagement? Okay, seeing none, we can move on to the watershed monitoring report. And I know that Fred has, as always, circulated his report to the committee in advance of the meeting. So Fred, I don't know if you want to share anything that was in that, or if anyone else has anything to share, which they're going to diligently follow up in a report to Fred after the meeting.
Yeah, I'll just urge everybody to fill in the form and just say that I, we've just, Alita and I have just been incredibly inactive. And of course, Alita's in British Columbia now. But my one thing was going down to Spencerville and looking at mortality of mussels. And I'll circulate the abstract for a presentation I'm doing for the biennial freshwater mollusk meeting, which is sort of going to Spencerville is part of what helped to trigger this is the idea that a lot of the mortality in our long-lived mussels mostly, is droughts and other kinds of mass mortality, and that we have to think about that when we're thinking about the sort of the population dynamics, and that it's sort of comparable to roadkill in turtles, where you have a really long-lived species and disasters that can take out a large part of the population. So yeah, if everybody can fill in their watershed monitoring report.
Our next meeting, as we just approved our meeting schedule, will be March 3rd. Again, reminder that is a Thursday at 3 p.m. and we will confirm the status of the Joint Standing Committee closer to that date as well. So that does bring us to the end of our agenda. So if there's nothing further that anyone would like to discuss, we will be looking for a mover for adjournment. I see Doug. Thank you, Doug.
And is anyone opposed to adjourning? Going to be
Seeing-
nice.
We can adjourn everyone. Mr. Chair.
And Mr. Chair, as we're adjourning, can I wish the best of the season to everyone, and we're looking forward to seeing you all back next year.
And perhaps in-person meetings where we can actually see each other.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a safe and wonderful holiday season with your families. Take care.
All right.
Season's
Thank
greetings.
you.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
everyone. Take care.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.